Oliver White Hill was an American civil rights lawyer who cooperated with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, in its legal fights for equality and helped establish many of the state's existing NAACP local units. Many of the men he eventually partnered with included Samuel Wilbert Tucker, Martin A. Martin, Senator Henry Marsh, and Judge Spotswood Robinson. A Presidential Medal of Freedom winner, Hill is considered the champion of desegregation in Virginia. His story is one of fearless resolve. Oliver Hill was born Charles White in Richmond, Virginia on May 1, 1907. Hill often would say that we are human earthlings and we need to consistently work to overcome the artificial barriers that have been erected to create separation among groups of our fellow humans. Mr. Hill was born into a fractured but close-knit family in Richmond. His father left the family when he was 2. His mother found work in resorts. Eventually, at the age of 6, his mother moved with Oliver to the city of Roanoke. Hill, eventually changing his name to Oliver in honor of his mother, was raised by the Pentecosts, who he referred to as his foster parents. Very affluent, they exposed Hill to hard work and even got him a role in an Oscar Micheaux, The Father of Black Cinema, film. Roanoke, like most places in Virginia, did not have adequate high schools. So when Oliver was about 13, his mother and new stepfather, Joseph Hill, moved to Washington, D.C., where Oliver attended Dunbar High School. Oliver was smart, but not a particularly good student. But the Pentecost had instilled in him a desire to go to college. When his stepfather's brother, a lawyer, passed, Oliver was given all of his law books, and Oliver, while a sophomore in college, read the Constitution and realized that the separate but equal doctrine was wrong and needed to be changed. In his own words, he decided if there was no one else going to do it, then he'd do it himself. While in 1930, Hill enrolled in Howard, and by 1933, he had obtained his law degree. Hill returned to Roanoke to begin his practice, but it was not successful. He eventually returned to Washington, D.C., where he did odd jobs, including working at the Capitol Restaurant. Something stirred in him to return to law, so in 1937, he returned to Richmond and began practicing law. It wasn't long before he earned a reputation for being a savvy and fearless lawyer. He took on criminal cases and then equal right cases. He took on teacher pay cases, such as Alston versus Norfolk, and won fair pay of black teachers. He then began to tackle fair accommodations cases. He then worked to integrate institutions of higher education, including the University of Virginia's Law School. By 1942, he had earned his first successes in school discrimination and accommodation cases. Then came World War II. In 1943, Hill, then 36, was drafted. Many believed that he was drafted to slow down his successful attack on discrimination. He served in the Army and eventually obtained the rank of sergeant. When he returned to Virginia, Hill again pressed for the growth of NAACP chapters and to take on discrimination cases. By 1947, he ran and won a seat on Richmond's City Council, but failed to retain the seat in 1949. Afterwards, he and his partners returned to their strategic attack on the separate but equal doctrine. One of the most famous challenges came when a high school student in Prince Edward County contacted Hill to help her and her fellow students get better schools. Hill originally was not interested in taking on the case, but after viewing the horrible conditions of the Prince Edward County black schools, he took the case. 150 plus plaintiffs later, the Davis versus Prince Edward County case was filed and eventually became consolidated in the landmark Supreme Court case Brown versus Board of Education. Brown was decided in 1954, and the Supreme Court deemed the separate but equal doctrine unconstitutional. Hill returned to Virginia to take on more cases that dismantled the Jim Crow doctrine. In 1956, he even stood before the Virginia General Assembly, where state leaders attempted to circumvent the mandates of the Supreme Court and demanded that they realize that a new day was born. Over Mr. Hill's career, he fought for fairness and public accommodations, employment, and education, which resulted in more than $50 million of improvements for minorities and the poor. Many cities honor Hill in various ways. Most Virginia law schools have a scholarship in his name. Richmond City Council renamed a roadway after him. There are 2 courts buildings, in Richmond and in Roanoke, named in his honor. And there is a state office building which bears his name. His likeness is in the nation's African American History Museum. Mr. Hill has received numerous awards, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor granted by the President of the United States. Hill died in August 2007 at the age of 100. Senator Tim Kaine once said about him, as a pioneer for civil rights, an accomplished attorney, a war veteran, Mr. Hill's dedication to serving the Commonwealth and the country never failed. And despite all of the accolades and honors he received, Mr. Hill always believed his true legacy was working to challenge the conscience of our Commonwealth and our country. Hill's legacy will last for countless generations. Hill once paraphrased a quote from his friend, Paul Laurence Dunbar: "We must and will face the dawn and not the setting sun."